Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the next instalment in the Master and Margarita slow read. I'm Cams Campbell, your host, and today we will be looking at chapters 15 to 18. I'm going to read out the essay that will be going out on Substack, which you can find over at camscampbellreads.substack.com. And this is going out as a podcast, which you might be listening to, or a video, which you might be watching, or as an essay, which you might be reading. So, let's get into it. Here is the essay. So, the subtitle I've got is a quotation which reads, "You must understand that the tongue can conceal the truth, but the eyes never." Right. This is the longest reading week in terms of pages. And then I've got an image here which shows that this week we have read 57 pages. Ironically, it has been the busiest week for me outside of reading, so to be publishing this essay on time is an achievement, with a capital A. Taking notes as I read continues to work well, and I'm enjoying looking through all the artwork immensely. BLACKWELLS is such a rich resource. But then the novel itself is a rich resource for art, wouldn't you say, dear reader? And I urge you to head on over to bulgakovart.com and take a look for yourselves. It's incredible. It's a fascinating instalment this week, but aren't they all? Is anyone reading ahead? So, to the book. Follow me, reader. Za mной, читатель. Chapter 15, Nicanor Ivanovich's Dream. We're at the clinic, and there's a new patient, Nicanor Ivanovich Bosoy. Remember the chairman of the housing committee who got caught with foreign currency hidden in the ventilation shaft of his bathroom? He's come to the clinic by way of an interrogation room. During questioning, he tells them all about Koroviev and urges them to arrest him. He admits to having taken bribes, but not to the foreign currency, which is fair enough, given that he didn't take any. Quote, "I took bribes, I did, but I took them in our Soviet money. I gave out registrations for money, I don't deny it, it happened. Our secretary, Paul Izhnev's a fine one too. He's a fine one as well. Let's put it bluntly, we're all thieves in the House Management Committee, but I didn't take any foreign currency." End quote. Nicanor Ivanovich begins acting erratically, claiming that Koroviev is right there in the room with him. He's carted off to the clinic and given a sedative. Meanwhile, the authorities check Berlioz's flat and find nothing suspicious. Even the wax seals are intact. Nicanor Ivanovich sleeps and dreams. He's in a theatre. The audience is made up of bearded men sitting on the floor of the auditorium. Nicanor Ivanovich joins them. The curtain rises and a handsome compere steps onto the stage to announce that the next act will be Nicanor Ivanovich Bosoy. He's summoned on stage and asked to return the $400 found in his ventilation shaft. Sergei Garadovich Danchil is next on stage. He too is invited to hand in his foreign currency. He claims to have already handed it in, whereupon a woman comes onto the stage carrying $18,000 and a diamond necklace worth $40,000. These were hidden in the flat of Ida Gerkolanovna in Kharkov, who just happens to be on the stage and holding the items in question. Then comes an actor performing an extract from a Pushkin play in which the protagonist dies atop a chest filled with money and jewels. This inspires someone in the audience to confess. Quote, "I believe you," the artiste finally exclaimed, and he extinguished his gaze. "I believe you. Those eyes are not lying. You know, how many times have I told you that your basic error consists in underestimating the significance of a man's eyes? You must understand that the tongue can conceal the truth, but the eyes, never." And there's a quote that opened the essay. He confesses to having $1,000 and 20 gold 10-ruble pieces hidden in his aunt's basement in a sweet tin, Einem confectionery, later Red October, after the revolution, so the pre-revolutionary name matters here. The compere thanks him for his honesty but condemns him for not admitting that his aunt, too, is a speculator. He admits it. The compere then asks for a car to be sent to take her to the women's theatre. Why a men's theatre and a women's theatre? Remember that Bulgakov was a playwright as well as a novelist. The whole scene is like a show trial of the sort that were prolific during Stalin's Great Terror of the 1930s. Bulgakov is using the theatre as a stand-in for the show trials, which were, in themselves, theatre. In Volin's Moscow, punishment is staged, gender-segregated and politely named, which is precisely what makes it terrifying. Quote, "Great piles of gold are lying there, and yes, they all belong to me." End quote. And that's from an aria in Tchaikovsky's opera The Queen of Spades from 1890, based on the story by Pushkin of 1834. I've got an image here called Nicanor Ivanovich's Dream by the artist Vyacheslav Zhelvakov. Nicanor Ivanovich then dreams of chefs coming into the auditorium with urns of soup and plates of black bread. One of these chefs slowly morphs into the nurse, Praskovya Fyodorovna, and she's giving him a sedative. Quote, "I mean, what is all this?" said Nicanor Ivanovich bitterly while being given the jab. "I've got none, and that's that. Let Pushkin hand in his foreign currency to them. I've got none." "No, you've got none," kind-hearted Praskovya Fyodorovna reassured him, "and what can't be cured must be endured." End quote. It's really quite something how often Pushkin appears in this novel. Chapter 16, The Execution. Quote, "The sun was already sinking over Bald Mountain, and the mount was cordoned off by a double cordon." End quote. I just love this technique of gluing the Moscow chapters to the pilot chapters. We follow the military cavalry unit known as an ala, Latin for wing. This would have comprised 500 horsemen recruited from Rome's provinces: Syrians, Thracians, Numidians, Samaritans and Idumeans. They reach Bald Mountain. Note, not Golgotha, which is Aramaic for place of the skull, or Calvary, which is Latin for skull. Is Bald Mountain significant? You bet it is. At the time Bulgakov was writing, Bald Mountain had become a cultural shorthand for an exposed space where evil is revealed. We can trace this theme back through Mussorgsky and Rimsky-Korsakov to Gogol. Mussorgsky's composition Night on Bald Mountain was originally titled St. John's Night on Bald Mountain. Mussorgsky took inspiration from Russian folk tales, including Gogol's St. John's Eve. Gogol's story takes place on Kupala Night, or St. John's Eve. In the tale, a peasant, Petro, is driven by love and greed to make a pact with a demon that leads him to murder to gain wealth. His later torment serves as a punishment and a warning against moral corruption. Mussorgsky's composition features in Disney's Fantasia, in which Chorna Bog, translation Black God, appears at Bald Mountain on St. John's Eve, and all the ghosts and ghoulies come out to play. And in the essay there's a link there to a YouTube video where you can watch that. The St. John's Eve theme also brings to mind Walpurgis Night from Goethe's Faust, when Faust and Mephistopheles travel to the Brocken, the highest peak in the Harz Mountains, where witches gather on the night of 30th of April, the annual Witches' Sabbath. I thought it's just come to me. I wonder if that's where the phrase Brocken Spectre comes from. Maybe I'll put an image in of me when I first saw a Brocken Spectre, and it was incredible. It must be. It must be. We see the same theme of evils being repeated in Moscow. Remember Volin's question about whether the Muscovites have changed internally? It's not about creating evil as much as revealing what was already there, implying, or revealing, that ideology is one thing, human nature is quite another. It's hot in Yerushalayim. The three condemned men are brought in a cart and are wearing white boards on their necks, reading Villain and Rebel. Behind ride the hooded man we met in the previous chapter, along with Centurion Marcus / Ratcatcher and the chief of the Yerushalayim Temple Guard. Most of the crowd that came out to see the procession have left, partly because of the heat, but also because this is just an ordinary execution, and they want to get ready for the Passover feast in the evening. Centurion Ratcatcher appears unperturbed by the heat, and it reminds me of the PT instructors from my army days, who would not only keep up with the squad effortlessly, but would run from the back to the front of the squad, sometimes backwards, in order to shout abuse at us for being, quote, worthless cretins, and other more colourful things. There is one other man on the hill, though. He's not in the best spot to watch the execution, but it's ideal for remaining unnoticed. He had earlier attempted to get through the cordon to where the prisoners were, but had been turned away by the legionaries. This man is Levi Matthew. We get the backstory of his plan to kill Yeshua with a knife in order to save him from execution, but his plans have gone awry. And I've got an image here of Yeshua on a cross by artist Charlie Stone. A storm whips up after Levi curses God. Levi watches as the commander of the cohort approaches the execution zone. The commander, or tribune, is acting on Pilate's orders. He's deliberately not named, just as the hooded man is not named. These characters are acting as functions and not as personalities. They represent procedure. The commander confers with the hooded man, and they both approach the execution crosses, accompanied by the chief of the temple guard. You might hear Willow purring in the background. The tribune represents Roman order, while the chief of the temple guard represents Jewish authority. This pairing shows Roman power authorising and local religious power legitimising. Pilate's wish for a merciful killing for Yeshua is carried out by a spear thrust amidst the facade of giving the prisoners water via a sponge. Pilate's hands are clean. Funnily enough, I've just finished reading Mark Galeotti's book, Putin's Wars, and Putin uses private mercenaries such as the Wagner Group for the very same reasons. A storm hits and gives Levi a chance to cut down the bodies from the crosses. We're then told that only 2 bodies remain. Levi and Yeshua's body have disappeared. Chapter 17, A Day with No Peace. It's the day after the magic show, and the queues for that night's performance are round the block. The accountant, Vasily Stepanovich Lastochkin, is now the senior staff member of the theatre, as all the others have disappeared. Eventually, the police arrive with a dog, the famous Ace of Diamonds. Ace sniffs around Rimsky's office, now in disarray and with a broken window, and sets to howling at the window. The investigation becomes more confused as there are no playbills for last night's show, no paperwork at all, and no one can properly remember the magician's name. One of them thinks it might be Voland, but isn't sure. Nothing shows up at Stiopa's flat either. A poster is put up cancelling that night's show, and the queue disperses over the next hour. The accountant, Vasily Stepanovich, goes to take care of some admin, including depositing the previous day's takings, 21,711 rubles. He tries to catch a taxi, but they all drive off. It transpires that the cabbies have been getting stiffed by fake 10 ruble notes from last night's performance. They get the notes in payment, make change, and then the notes turn into paper labels and B's. Quote, "I give him change, 4.50. He gets out, the bastard. 5 minutes later, I take a look, and instead of the 10 ruble note, there's the label from a bottle of Narzan." End quote. He gets to the Spectacles Commission to find the place in disarray. The chairman's secretary is distraught and leaps up when she sees the accountant. She drags him into the chairman's office, and there a strange spectacle meets them. The chairman is at his desk, working as usual, only he himself is invisible, and all that can be seen is his suit. And I've got an image here which says, "An empty suit sows panic in a Soviet institution, around which trucks with singing clerks dance in a round." It's by artist Vladislav Pantelkin, known as Panalyevich on Instagram, and there's a link there to his Instagram. The secretary explains that a black cat had come in, followed by a man with a cat-like face, and after a bit of shouting, the chairman had been made invisible. 2 police officers arrive and the accountant makes his escape. He heads to the branch office on Vagankovsky Lane. There's a young lady there selling special entertainment literature. All of a sudden, she begins to sing. Voices join in from all over the building, singing in unison, as if conducted by an invisible conductor. They are unable to stop singing, even through clenched teeth. The manager had a history of setting up extracurricular clubs, including chess and drafts, ping-pong and boating, and had brought in Koroviev during the lunch break to set up a choir. You may recall in Chapter 1 that he was introduced as a choir master, so he has the credentials right enough. He gets them singing the first verse of Glorious Sea, Sacred Baikal, then excuses himself. After 10 minutes, he hasn't returned, but the singers begin to sing the second verse unsolicited and against their will. The young lady's story is interrupted when 3 trucks pull up and the entire staff of the branch office is loaded up and taken away. They continue singing on the open backs of the trucks as they're carted off to Stravinsky's clinic. The accountant then makes his way to the finance department to deposit his 21,000 rubles. You won't be surprised to learn that when he opens his case, he discovers not rubles, but all kinds of foreign currency. He's immediately arrested. Chapter 18, Unlucky Callers. Berlioz's uncle, Maximilian Andreevich Poplavsky, arrives in Moscow from Kiev. He had received a telegram from Berlioz to let him know of his death and funeral arrangements. He finds it weird to have received a notification from Berlioz of his own funeral. Quote, "That's why clever men are clever, to sort out tangled things." End quote. The reason for Poplavsky's trip to Moscow is not, as one might think, to attend his nephew's funeral. Oh no. He's thinking only of the late Berlioz's flat. He presents himself at the Housing Management Committee building and requests an audience with the chairman. Remember Bassoy? Of course, he's not there, nor is his secretary, just a grief-stricken committee member. Poplavsky enters the flat and is surprised to see that it was a cat that let him in. Koroviev appears and seems distraught at the death of Berlioz. Poplavsky introduces himself and asks who sent him the telegram, to which Koroviev replies that it was the cat. The cat owns up and demands Poplavsky's passport. He glances at it and then exclaims that were he in charge of passport issuing, he would not have issued one to someone like Poplavsky. Oh no. And then I've got an image here of Behemoth with the passport. And it's called Behemoth Reading a Passport Upside Down by artist Eugenie Shitrov. Quote, "What department issued the document?" asked the cat, peering at a page. No reply ensued. 412, said the cat to himself, moving his paw across the passport, which he was holding upside down. Well, yes, of course. I know that department. They issue passports to absolutely anyone. Whereas I, for example, wouldn't issue one to somebody like you. Not for anything would I issue one. I'd just take one look at your face and instantly refuse. The cat got so angry that he flung the passport onto the floor. Your attendance at the funeral is cancelled, the cat continued in an official voice. Be so kind as to leave for your place of residence. End quote. Behemoth calls on Azazello to assist in removing Poplavsky, which he does by beating him with a roast chicken. We're treated to the second line of Anna Karenina. Quote, everything was in confusion in the Oblonsky's house. End quote. Just as everything was in confusion at the late Berlioz's flat. As he's leaving, Poplavsky makes his way down the stairs and a tiny little elderly man with, quote, an extraordinary sad face, end quote, passes on his way up. Poplavsky, referred to variously as Maximilian Andreevich, the economist, the economic planner and the Kievan, decides to wait in a cubbyhole on the stairs to see what happens to the sad-faced man. It's not long before the sad-faced man comes back down without his hat and with a scratch on his bald pate and soaking wet trousers. Shuddering at the thought of danger, Poplavsky leaves and heads to Kiev station to depart. We learn that the sad-faced man is Andrei Fokic, the barman from the theatre. He's let into the flat by a topless, red-haired woman wearing only an apron and shoes and with a scar around her neck. As he enters, the maid takes a phone call, some of which we get to overhear. Yes, the maid was saying into the telephone. What? Baron Miguel? Go ahead. Yes, the artiste is in today. Yes, he'll be glad to see you. Yes, guests? Tails or black jacket? What? For 12 midnight. Finishing the conversation, the maid hung up the receiver and turned to the barman. What do you want? What might be happening at 12 midnight? Wait and see, dear reader. I've got a great image here called The Naughty Apartment Through the Eyes of the Variety Theatre Bartender by Nikolai Korolyov. It's a very rich and colourful image. We're given a description of Berlioz's study. Azazello is roasting meat skewered on a sword over the open fire, and Behemoth is sitting on a tiger skin in front of the fire. It's quite a scene. He spies Voland on the immense couch and introduces himself, whereupon Voland launches into a tirade about the slops they were serving at the theatre bar, including sturgeon that had gone off. The barman responds that it was, quote, second grade fresh. Quote, Excuse me, began Andrei Fokic, stunned by this sudden attack. I've not come about that, and the sturgeon's got nothing to do with it. How can it have nothing to do with it, if it was off? They sent a sturgeon that was second grade fresh, announced the barman. My dear fellow, that's nonsense. What's nonsense? Second grade fresh, that's nonsense. There's only one grade of freshness, first grade. And that's first and last too. And if the sturgeon's second grade fresh, then that means it's rotten. End quote. This phrase, second grade fresh, or vtoraya svежесть, became one of Bulgakov's most enduring gifts to Russian culture. Fish is either fresh or it isn't. Second grade is obfuscation, Soviet-style jargon to express as truth something that clearly isn't. It's a phrase that's still used often in Russia today. Voland asks Azazello to get the barman a stool, which he does. Quote, the one who was roasting the meat turned around, horrifying the barman with his fangs in so doing, and deftly handed him one of the dark, low oak stools. There were no other seats in the room. End quote. One of its leg breaks, whereupon the barman tumbles to the floor, catching the table with his foot and spilling red wine all over his trousers. Azazello hands him a second seat. Aha! I thought there weren't any other seats. It's like diabolical slapstick or bad vaudeville. This is Voland's domain and the logic of reality need not apply. Quote, I like sitting low down, began the artiste. It's not so dangerous falling from something low. End quote. What a funny line, as if to say, know thy place, barman, don't get above your station. Azazello gives Andrei a piece of the meat he's been roasting on the fire. It's fresh and extraordinarily tasty, unlike the sturgeon. At this point, an owl flies into the apartment and scratches Andrei Fokic's bald patch with its wing. In Russian and wider Slavic literature, an owl entering a house is a bad omen, presaging death, illness, or disaster. The barman finally gets to his point, which is to inform Voland that the bar is out of pocket to the tune of 109 rubles because of the 10 ruble notes turning into chopped up paper in the till. Soviet joylessness and abstinence. These two paragraphs jumped out at me as worthy of considering more deeply. It made me think a little of today's world of living without meaning and purpose, instant gratification and dopamine hits, versus morality, conservatism and truth. I could be barking up the wrong tree, of course, but is Bulgakov actually speaking out in favour of hedonism? I think we need to consider the times, as the themes don't necessarily apply to today. Voland. Say what you will, but there's something evil lurking in men who avoid wine, games, the society of delightful women, table talk. Such people are either gravely ill or secretly hate those around them. End quote. Here's one interpretation that seems to work. Andrei Fokic is a kind of Soviet nobody, living in fear of excess, not for moral reasons, but for virtue-signalling reasons. Bulgakov uses Voland to parody the Soviet suspicion of pleasure, where sociability and enjoyment appear morally or politically suspect, while abstinence is misread as virtue. Quote, "And I wouldn't advise you to go into a clinic either," continued the artiste. "Where's the sense in dying in a hospital ward to the groans and wheezing of the terminally ill? Isn't it better to spend those 27,000 on organising a banquet and taking poison to move to the other side to the sounds of strings, surrounded by intoxicated beauties and spirited friends?" End quote. The follow-up fantasy of an elegant, self-chosen death accompanied by music and friends rather than endured in a hospital ward reflects Bulgakov's own medical experience and his horror at bureaucratised, dehumanised dying. Addressed to a timid, compliant barman, these speeches are less temptations than diagnoses. Voland does not celebrate excess so much as condemn a life emptied of pleasure, dignity and human warmth, a life reduced to fear and survival. Which side does Bulgakov fall on? It's better to burn out than to fade away? I'm not so sure. Voland asks Andrei Fokic about his financial status. A voice from the other room pipes in that he's got substantial savings and that he won't manage to spend it all because he's going to die of liver cancer in 9 months' time. Voland. "However, we've got carried away," exclaimed the host. "To business. Show me your chopped up paper." Andrei Fokic pulls the chopped up paper from his pocket only to discover that it is in fact a wad of 10 ruble notes. Naturally, he's bewildered. Voland tells him to get in touch if it happens again, and Koroviev calls on the maid Hela to show the barman out. This is the first time that the naked red-haired Hela has been named in the novel. After he leaves, Andrei realises that he's forgotten his hat and reluctantly goes back to get it. Hela hands it over with a sword and is surprised when he refuses the sword, saying that it's not his. "You came without a sword, did you?" asked Hela in surprise. He puts on his hat, only it's not his hat at all, but a velvet beret with a tattered cockerel's feather. It turns into a black cat and sinks its claws into Andrei's bald pate. "Aya!" He heads to the chemist's and gets bandages for his head. He learns where the nearest cancer specialist is, just across the courtyard, and heads there for a diagnosis. He gets in to see Professor Kuzmin, who examines him and finds no evidence of liver cancer. Andrei Fokic leaves 3 10-ruble notes as payment and leaves. When Professor Kuzmin finishes his shift and goes to pick up the money, he's surprised to discover seltzer water labels instead of 10-ruble notes. Quote, "The devil knows what's going on," muttered Kuzmin, dragging the skirt of his white coat across the floor and fingering the bits of paper. "It turns out he's not just a schizophrenic, but a cheat as well." End quote. And right where the money was is a black kitten lapping at a saucer full of milk. Kuzmin's office gets rather strange. A foxtrot plays on the gramophone and a sparrow with a limp dances on his desk before smashing the glass of a photo frame with its beak. And that's us at the end of part 1 of the novel, and almost exactly halfway through. If you think it's been weird so far, buckle up, as that weirdness level gets turned up to 11 in part 2. And that's where I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching /listening/reading. Follow me, reader. Za mной, читатель.